here. All right. Can you guys see my screen well? Give me a yes or a no. All right, good. We will wait for some time. It is just 7. We will start around 7ish. Start softly. Do you mean the song, or do you mean I should start the class softly? I will start the class softly. All right. Login page nahi banana. Please drop a Web3. Okay, Vishnu, stop spamming the chat. I know, I heard your question. You meant the song. Never mind. At the end of the class, maybe. Slow. We will go slow. Week 4 solutions. Week 4 solutions haven't been recorded. I will record them. TypeScript when? Maybe 2 more weeks before we move to TypeScript. Just slow and more offline videos. Offline videos तो आ रही हैं. देखो यार, मतलब my learning up until this point has been कि we will need a lot of offline videos. Can a full stack developer call themselves a software engineer? Sure, why not? So yeah, there will be a lot of offline videos. Specifically this week will most probably be, a lot of offline videos. All right. Wait for 2 more minutes, then we will start. React offline videos. Yeah, we'll add a lot of them. Like the number of topics to cover in React are too much. And if we go at the speed at which we are right now, we basically will take weeks. So for React, there will be a lot of offline classes. All right, let me pause chat here. All right, more assignments. Sure. Use NeoVim. I don't think so. I think it'll just be overwhelming. Assignments nahi ho rahe hain. Please help karo, sir. Okay, I will release a lot of videos on assignment. I mean, basically, I'll try my best to solve all assignments in a video fashion. That way, more people can join. Okay, let's see. Let me write that down. We'll wait for another minute. We will start at 7:03. More offline videos on assignment solving. All right. By the way, one help I need, if anyone has any contacts in Delhi police, then ping Rookie. We need some help. All right. We'll wait for 30 more seconds and then we will start. These are the topics for today, by the way. We'll try our best to cover everything. Unsure if we'll be able to, but I think my initial estimates are we should be able to cover everything that you see here on the screen. Panga ho gaya sir. Panga kuch nahi hua hai. We need permissions. I'm basically trying to find a venue for our meetup, and for that you need permissions, for which you need to talk to some DSP, which is going to take a long time. So if someone already has contacts and can help us get that, that would be super appreciated. All right, that's it. Isko chhod ke panga nahi hua. Let's get right into it, guys. Let me make sure we're recording locally, and then we will proceed. We're recording, and the mic is the right one. All right. So welcome to week 6.2. Today's class is going to be about custom hooks in React. That will be the biggest thing you will learn, but we'll also learn some already provided hooks. So there are some hooks that are already provided to you: use effect, use callback, use memo. And there is something called custom hooks, which is basically hooks that you can write and create for other people. So you can create a use Harkirat hook or something like that. And you can use, why are so many people spamming chat? Let me open WhatsApp on the side. Okay. And how can you create your own custom hooks for other people to use? This is the high level goal for today. In the end, we will try to introduce something called prop drilling. This is something that's needed for next week, or basically before we get into state management. So we'll try our best to reach here, but at the very least, let's cover all 3 of these hooks and some custom hooks. Let's get right into it. The first thing you need to know of some jargon, which are good to know. Even if you don't understand these very well, it's fine. But these are things you will keep on hearing as you go through your React journey. The first one is called side effects, and the second one is called hooks. Hooks we have discussed a little bit. Side effects are something new. In React, the concept of a side effect encompasses any operation that reaches outside the functional component of a React component, functional scope of a React component. Too many words here. I'll try to break it down. The operations can affect other components, interact with your browser, or perform asynchronous data fetching. What this means is, in React, the React that we have been writing, we have functional components. We create a function inside which we write some logic. Anything that's not related to rendering anything that's not related to putting things on the DOM, taking things out of the DOM, are called side effects. Specifically things like whenever you're trying to fetch data from a backend, or you're trying to create a set timeout or a set interval, or if you're directly trying to manipulate the DOM, which is something you shouldn't do in React, but let's say you try to do it. All of these can be considered as something called side effects because these aren't part of the main React rendering cycle. If you weren't creating a dynamic application, if you were creating a simple static application, you wouldn't even worry about any of these. But most applications in the real world are dynamic applications, and those have things like, a very basic example here is fetching data from the backend. That's a bare minimum thing any dynamic website needs. It's a full stack application. It has a front end in React, it has a backend in Node.js or Java or Golang. So your front end needs to talk to a backend. This asynchronous call, this fetch call that we keep doing from time to time can be classified as a side effect. And similarly, if you want to add a set timeout in your code base or a set interval in your code base, these are also considered as a side effect. And why are they called side effects? Why is this concept even needed to be understood? Because these need to be separate from your rendering cycle. There is some there is some specific things that are happening when you're rendering a component. Functions get called, components get called. And there are these other set of things that need to happen on the side, which is why they're called side effects. They don't necessarily should collude with the rendering cycle. We'll see this visually very soon in the next 2-3 slides, but high level, one thing to keep in mind, side effects. Other thing to keep in mind, hooks. Hooks are a feature introduced in React 16.8. So you should know they weren't part of React for the longest time. And then when React 16.8 came is when the concept of hooks was introduced that allow you to use the state and other React features without writing a class. So I discussed this yesterday many times. Okay, the way we are writing components now is the fresh way of writing components from some React 16, React 17. Before that, you would create classes. And when you created classes, there was a certain way to do state management there. There was a certain way to do what were called life cycle events. If you remember, okay, a component has mounted, a component has unmounted, a few things we were discussing yesterday. To introduce all of those things in functional components from React 16.8, hooks were introduced. They enable functional components to have access to the stateful logic, basically let them have a state using useState, and lifecycle features. The thing that I was discussing yesterday a little bit. What are lifecycle features? Basically giving the developer access to a function like component has mounted, component has unmounted, and a bunch of other common life cycle features. We will see these very soon as well, which were previously only possible in class components. So React 16.8 mein, the reason they had to introduce this was because before React 16.8 or some version, only class-based components were present. They were fully fledged, nice way to write React components. From some version onwards, functional components were introduced, and functional components mein, there was no easy way to do state management or get access to lifecycle features, which is why hooks were introduced. This has led to a more concise and readable way of writing components in React. We will see both of these in action very soon, but high level, 2 jargons to know before we start today. Side effects. Any of these things, if you see, consider them or call them as a side effect. Hooks, something introduced from React 16.8 that gives you access to lifecycle features and stateful logic. Let's see that in action. Common hooks are these. Some of these we have discussed, useState, little bit of useEffect we discussed. And these are some other popular ones. You can create your own, as I said, and there are a bunch of other popular ones I haven't listed here, but generally you'll find a bunch of commonly used hooks. These are probably the most popular ones. useState, useEffect, useCallback, useMemo, useRef, and useContext. These 4 we are discussing today. These 2 I'll try to cover in an offline video. Let's start with the most simple hook, useState. We have discussed this many times now, and I'm hoping you have an intuition for this. It lets you describe the state of your application. The state of your application, a simple object which contains what your front end should look like. For example, here for a simple counter, what are the dynamic parts of my application? It is this count, which keeps going up as I click on the click me button. Is there anything else that's dynamic on this website? Not really. There's a simple website, there's a simple button. The text inside this button is dynamic, which is why we use the use state hook to store this state in the count variable. Anytime the button is clicked, we call set count with count plus 1. It increases the state. This component re-renders, and then 4 appears here, and then 5 appears here, so on and so forth. When the state updates, it triggers the re-renders, which finally results in the DOM update or the DOM manipulation. High level, everything you need for a simple React application, until you are trying to use side effects, until you're trying to hit the backend, until you're trying to introduce a set timeout here. This much is good enough. Use state is the only hook you need to create a dynamic website. The problem comes when you have to either hit the backend or introduce a set timeout or do some other side effect, which you can't really do without introducing a bunch of new hooks. Okay? That's use state. That's the first one. Let's move on to the next one. Use effect. We discussed this a little bit more yesterday. Let's look at, slide link. Okay. Small detour here. This is the slide link for people who haven't. Take a screenshot, waiting for 5 seconds, and open it up. All right. Use effect. The use effect hook is a feature in React, a popular JavaScript library for building interfaces. We know what React is. It allows you to perform side effects in functional components. What were side effects? Doing a backend call, introducing a set timeout, introducing a set interval. Use effect lets you perform these side effects. Side effects are operations that can affect other components or can't be done during rendering, such as data fetching, subscriptions, or manually changing the DOM in the React components. What are subscriptions, Harkirat? Ignore for now. Data fetching, you understand? Fetching the data from the backend is something that can't be done during rendering, or more specifically shouldn't be done during rendering. If you try to do data fetching during rendering, you should remember that we render very often and React does a bunch of optimizations, but a lot of renders are happening. If you try to do data fetching or any other side effect like introducing a set timeout during rendering, you will face issues. You will see 10 different set timeouts when you should just see one. You will see infinite number of fetch calls rather than just seeing one. This is why you need use effect to limit or on the side do all of these side effects. The use effect hook serves the same purpose as component did mount, component did update, or component will unmount in the React class components, but unified into a single API. So this is what I was talking about. Okay, before React 16 was introduced, there were class-based components, and there you had access to very nice functions that would tell you that this specific component has rendered, or it has updated, or it has unmounted. And over there you would put your fetching logic, the logic to actually fetch from a backend. Because when do you want to fetch from a backend? Let's say you have a to-do application. When do you want to fetch all of your to-dos? When the component mounts. So you had this component did mount function inside which you would put all of your logic to fetch data from the backend. This was great. But now that we have moved to functional components, you need something else. Use effect is that thing. We will see that in action very soon. Let's start with a simple, more realistic, real world example that introduces this F1 racing. If you've already seen this, hopefully some of you know this. It is a car race. And let's say you are a car racer that has to do 100 laps around a stadium. Okay? Very common thing in an F1 race. You are allowed to take a pit stop from time to time. What is a pit stop? When you are going through the laps, suddenly you might feel you have to get your tires changed, your engine checked, your oil checked, so on and so forth. So you can do a small pit check from time to time. Do you take the pit stop in every lap, or do you take a pit stop every 10 laps, let's say, or maybe when your tire pressure changes? At what point do you take a pit stop? You take a pit stop at some condition, right? You don't take it on every lap. If this is my stadium and this is me and this is the pit stop. This is the pit stop. I won't stop here after every lap. I will have some conditions under which I will make a pit stop, get my tires changed, and then go back and take 20 laps. And then under some other condition, go here, hit the pit stop, take 20 more laps, so on and so forth. You will only make a pit stop from time to time. Let's say once every 20 laps, even though you pass right in front of it in every lap. In every lap, you will have the option of going here, but you will choose not to. Under some conditions will you actually go here. Making a pit stop is sort of a side effect. It is something you don't want to do in every render. It is something that should independently run. And when I say independently, I don't mean on a different thread. I mean independently, irrespective of how many renders are happening. If a certain condition is met, pit stop should be done, else pit stop should not be done. This is the same as fetching data from a backend, because when should you fetch data from a backend in, let's say, a to-do application? When the component renders for the first time. Uske baad, does not matter how many re-renders happen, you will not send another backend request unless you have a certain condition under which you have to do it. But you shouldn't do it on every render. That is what a side effect is. And then there are some conditions under which you should run a specific side effect. The use effect, this is the same definition we saw a few slides ago. The use effect thing is not exactly the pit stop. The pit stop is the side effect, and you making the pit stop is something similar to use effect. For example, let's look at this code on the left. This is a simple to-do application. It has a to-do component that has been written somewhere else. Ignore that for now. It has a top level app component. We say const to-dos, set to-dos equal to use state empty state. Then we have some code here. Ignore this code for now. And then I return div and iterate over all the to-dos and I render them on screen. Let's look at what the logic here says. It says use effect and has a first function as an input. And in this first function, I do a fetch call to our backend server, get back all the to-dos, get them in a JSON object, and then finally set to-dos with JSON.todos. Little we did this yesterday. Question is, Harkirat, why did you wrap this inside a use effect? What is this second argument? And why did I not just do this fetch call without the use effect? Why can't I write this fetch call right here? Why do I have to wrap it inside a use effect? The same reason as not making the pit stop in every render or in every lap. This app function will keep getting called anytime a re-render happens. Anytime set to-dos is called, if there is another state variable here, this app function will get called again and again. That's what a re-render is. So anytime state changes, app function will get called again. When it gets called, do you want to again refetch data? No, you just want to fetch the data once. And the use effect sort of lets you put some conditions. The second array here is actually the set of conditions under which you want this code to run. And that is why you wrap this fetch call inside a use effect. And then you ensure that this call only goes once. Just how you would only hit the pit stop from time to time. Let's say in this specific scenario, you only hit the pit stop before you start the race. And then you keep going for 100 laps without hitting the pit stop ever again. This is the equivalent of that. Okay, when the thing renders for the first time, when you write use effect like this, where the second argument is an empty array, it means the first time this function is called, the first time this component renders, this code will run, and never will it run again. I repeat, never it will run again. Only the first time it component runs or renders will this code run. And that is why use effect is a popular hook to do a side effect under some conditions. Cool. That's a high level of use effect. We'll see this in action soon. We'll write some code as well. What should happen? Making the pit stop, the tire is getting changed, the engine oil is getting checked. All of that logic is written here in the first argument. Under what condition should it happen is what is written in this dependency array. It is an empty array here, which basically means do it only once. We will see later on when you need to put some data in here and how that data affects when this specific condition is met. For example, as I said, if your tire pressure is low, you probably want to hit the pit stop. If your engine levels are weird, you probably want to hit the pit stop. Here also, under some, in this case, you don't need any condition, but in some other use case, you might need some conditions. We'll see what that is very soon. All right. From the top, we understand use effect. We'll write all of this code very soon as well. Let's understand what this dependency array is. It states when should the callback function run. Right now we sent an empty array, and I just told you, you can keep this at the top of your head. Okay, if this is an empty array, it means this code will only run once. But of course, this array does have a significance, right? What is that significance? As I said, when would you hit the pit stop? Either your tire burst, tire pressure is up, 10 laps have passed, engine is making a noise, or you just want to change the car. Under some condition, would you actually hit the pit stop? Similarly, if there is any condition under which you want to hit this specific code, you put that condition here. But what does condition mean here? Do I put an if check here? Do I write tire burst here? What do I write? The thing that it takes as input is state variables. I repeat, it takes state variables as input, and any time that state variable changes, this code reruns. For example, one of the applications that we kept seeing was this click me app right here. Here, count is a state variable. So if I write a use effect here where I put count as a dependency, then anytime count changes, when does count change? When I click on it. Whenever I click on this button, count will change. And if the effect here has count as a dependency, the effect will rerun because count has changed. That is what the dependency array means. And that is what you usually put it inside it. You put a state variable inside it because you want to run a certain logic anytime a state variable changes. But let's look at this more practically from a very basic example. So now open Visual Studio Code, initialize a simple React application, going to give you guys around 20 seconds, maybe take a minute, it's fine. And then we'll write some code. What if children has use effect parent re-renders? Even if parent re-renders, child will only run this code if dependency changes. Even if we are specifying, if you specify dependency, if you specify dependency here, if that dependency changes, will this code rerun? Why are we not using async await? Is it because use effect does not allow the function to be async? That is correct. Then we can wrap the first function. Yeah, you can somehow wrap. You can't make the outer function async, but if you feel like making it, if you want to make it async for some reason, I showed this yesterday, just call the main function here, call a function here and define that outside as an async function. Slide link is this. Please initialize the React application really quickly and give the idea of scoping variables. Can you see this? Okay. A few things I'm seeing in chat. We can use Axios instead of fetch. I'm okay either way. If you want to, if you know what Axios is, I'm hoping you know how to replace this code with Axios. All right. This is the code that we're solving for today. We have to take 30 more seconds. For the people who don't know, let me do this locally as well. Go to the folder where you want to initialize your React application. Wait. Give your project a name. I'm going to call it week 6.2 React JavaScript, and then open it in Visual Studio Code. Once you have an empty React project here, clear the app.css file, clear the index.css file, app.jsx, remove all the logic. And now let's kick things off with a simple application, simple to-do application like this. Basically try to write this code yourself, or if you want to copy over the gist, you can get it from the slides as well. I'm going to write all of this code myself on my machine. Would urge you to do the same. We have done this yesterday, so I'm hoping this is faster and you can do it yourself very quickly. I'm going to do the same. Someone said, Harkirat, please use Axios. So let me try and use Axios. Axios is another library that lets you hit HTTP calls, do HTTP calls under the hood. It still uses fetch, but it's slightly cleaner syntax. So for the people who do want to use Axios, run the command npm install Axios in your terminal. Make sure you're in the right folder. And then just import it. And rather than sending a fetch call, you can do a axios.get. Then response. This is the Axios syntax of sending a backend call. You can send you can use the fetch syntax, you can use this syntax, whichever one is more suitable to you. All right, this is done. And then what do we have to do? Iterate over all the to-dos. Again, you don't have to write all of this locally. Feel free to copy it from this gist as well. This has all the code. All right. So what have I done? I've written the code to fetch all the to-dos from this backend server, which is currently up. If I go here, you will see it returns you a list of to-dos which are random. If I refresh, you will see a random list of to-dos that this endpoint returns me. I'm sending a request there, getting the response, and response.data.todos is what I store in the state variable. Harkirat, why are you not doing await.json? Because Axios is smart that way. It figures out that this is a JSON data and already does all the parsing for me. All right, let's see if this works. Let me run npm install and then run npm run dev. If I go here, I see to-dos rendered, which basically means this seems to be working as expected. The one thing you should check is, okay, does this code get run once? Does this code get runs twice? Does this code keeps on getting run like infinitely? Only then do you know that you've done that this use effect is doing something substantial, right? We want this code to only run once, not infinitely. That is the problem with doing this. If I do this, it will still work, but this code runs infinitely because app renders, we do a get, we set to-dos, state updates, re-render, axios.get, state updates, re-render, so on and so forth. It's stuck in an infinite loop. If I refresh, you will see an infinite loop is running, which is why that was the whole goal of use effect, to make sure this runs once. So feel free to put like a log here, even though you can visually see, okay, this seems to be working as expected. You only see it once. You actually see it twice, but that is just because we are running React in strict mode right now. You can get rid of that as well by going to main.jsx and removing react.strict mode. Now if I refresh, I see it just once. We have a simple backend application. The bigger, so if you don't understand this, let me do a poll, but I'm hoping this was easy. I was a little fast, but that's because we don't have to. You can just copy over the code. As long as you understand this code, it's fine. The next one you have to implement yourself. But is this one clear? 85%, 83%. Okay. If this one is clear, I'm looking at chat very soon, but for the people for whom this is clear, do this assignment, take 5 minutes and try to solve it yourself. Write a component that takes a to-do ID as an input and fetches the data for that specific to-do from the given endpoint. This is the endpoint. And then renders it. How would the dependency array change? Would it change at all or not? This is a new endpoint I'm giving you, someserver.honeydecksteps.com/todo $ID equal to 1. This will basically give you the to-do details for the to-do with ID 1. Similarly, if you replace ID with 2, ID with 3, it will give you details of that specific to-do. What do you have to write? If you look at the code on the right, you have to write something like this. The top level div app renders to-do ID equal to 1. This component takes an ID as an input. And here you have to write the use effect, which does whatever it's supposed to, which is, fetch the specific details for that specific to-do, update the state variable, and then render it here. Okay? If you understood this, which was 85%, please try to solve this for the next 5 minutes. Until that, let me quickly look at the chat. Okay, let's answer Himanshu's question here. Every time I click the button, the count increases. When the count becomes 5, hey, logged out. But again, I click the button, it becomes 6, hey. Okay, let's see. Oh, your condition is totally incorrect, sir. Condition, okay, someone pasted this. This is wrong. Condition does not mean an equal condition. That was exactly what I was saying. Condition, the thing that you have to put here is what should I watch on? When should this code run? And here you should put your if count equal to 5 logic. All right. Don't put real conditions here. Okay, when this is true, run this. Put what you need to watch on and then actually render it. Right. Good question. 4.5 minutes, guys. Please show how to run. You have to open the terminal, npm install, just run this once and then npm run dev and it will start your server here. This is the problem statement for people who are implementing. And the slide link is this link right here. For someone whose Vite is failing, you have some local Node.js installation issue, I'm assuming. Try to upgrade to Node 20 SE or on 18. Can you write 2 use effects in the same function? You can. You can put as many use effects here as you want. Each will independently run on their own set of conditions. You can be like, what will happen here? This will run on render and this will run on the initial render. If I put some condition here, then this one will run only once and this one will run anytime this specific state variable changes. Let's say it's count. So you can put as many effects in here as you want. Can you show the Axios code here, please? There you go. That's the Axios code. Feel free to look at it. Can you paste the link to slides in chat? Let me do that. That's actually a good point. Okay, 3 more minutes, guys. Again, this is the problem statement. Please show how to run a JSX file. What kind of a question is that? You run npm run dev and you don't run a JSX file. It's not like a CPP file that you can run. This is the question. We will do use effect very soon in a much more useful fashion here when we're solving this problem. 2 more minutes and then I'll start solving it. How to use async await syntax in use effect? Great question. Let's say you want to use async await syntax. You cannot do this. You cannot do this because this function cannot be async for some reason. Forget why. Even I don't know. But whenever you're creating a use effect, this top level function cannot be async. If you do want to use an async function, you can do one of 2 things. The ugly way to do this is you define a function outside, call it whatever, and then, you know, make the function call from here and do this. Just don't await it. You don't have to await it. You just want main to run. So this is the ugly way to do it. The better way to do it is use something called the async use effect library, because it does one extra thing that you don't do here. Basically, this specific code base is a little dangerous if you do this, because 1 second. Yeah. If this depends on a dependency, then what might happen is, okay, you know, count changed, main got called. This call went out, it's still in the process of running. And then count changed again. And then main got called again. And then the other request went out. And this other request, the second request resolved first. And then you set to-dos to the second render. And then the original request responded later for some reason. This server was not responding, whatever reason. And then you set to-dos to the first count, which is why this is a little dangerous, slightly dangerous way to do this. If you want to do it this way, you should actually cancel it, which how you do it we can get to in a different video. But high level, easy way to do it is this. Define an async function outside and call it. Better way to do it is use some library that handles this weird security bug that I'm talking about, and use async effect, I think, is one such library that lets you do it. Take care. All right, that's all the questions I'm answering. How many of you were able to solve the problem that I gave here? Were you able to solve it? Okay, 50% yes, 50% no. Cool. All right. Let's start off. Let's start with the boilerplate code. Let me copy it from this gist. Oh, this gist has the whole solution. Never mind. I will delete the solution and try to okay. Cool. So this was the problem statement. I said implement effect here. Okay, so stop coding now. If you've not been able to do it, it's fine. Try to follow along and then later try it again. What is the problem statement? कि देखो to do id equal to 1 or 2 or 3 is something that will be passed in as an input. What do you have to do? You have to, based on the id, get that specific to do from the backend and then set to do and then render it here. Harkirat, why not do it here? Why not do the original approach? We were getting, no, this is the problem statement. You have to use this endpoint. You cannot use the original endpoint that we were using. So then I said, okay, haan, bhai, I know this. We have just done this. Create a use effect, which the first time this renders, it will send a either axios.get or fetch, whatever you want to send, to this specific endpoint. Only question mark ID will be the ID that the user has sent us as an input. And then what can I do? Set to do's response.data.todo. Halkiyat, why data here? This is Axios. Axios may, if you want to get access to the final thing, you have to write response.data. Whatever your final key is. And what does our backend return us? If I go to the browser, it returns us .to do has my title, has my description. So I need to do a response.data.to do. This key over here comes from this key over here that the backend returns, but response.data basically is all the data that the backend returned you, and I call set to do's. I render them here. Let's see if this works as expected or not. Okay, this much is the code base. You will find this code base as such completely solved here in the slides if you have the slides locally. Okay, feel free to copy it. Let's see if it runs or not. It doesn't run. Something simple I'm probably missing. Axios is not defined. And there you go. Exercise, 30 minutes of jogging. If I open the console, I see a network request go out. To do question mark ID equal to 3, it returns me some data, and that is what I was able to render here. How? Set to do's, re-render, and then set it here. And if I replace this with 4, this changes. If I replace this with 5, this changes. Great. We have the component is done. We have written the right component and everything is good until I ask you to make this. Now I ask you, make something like this. Put a bunch of buttons on top, and when the person clicks on 1, they should see the to do 1 here. When the person clicks on 2, they should see the to do 2 here, 3, to do 3, so on and so forth. So the easy thing to do here is what? Add a bunch of buttons. 1, 2, 3, 4. The mildly harder thing to do is when you click on the button 1, somehow this becomes 1. And then when you click on the button 2, somehow this becomes 2. Can you figure out how to do this? Can you do something here? Can you introduce some state here to do it? Try to figure this out yourself for the next 6 minutes. 7:45 I will start again. Solve this problem. Given the original code that is present in this slide, convert it to this. Put a bunch of buttons on the top. This is very common. You will see on a bunch of websites. You can go to the second page, third page, some sort of pagination. This is very similar. You click on 2, you see the second to do here. Click on 3, it's third to do here. I've given you some boilerplate code as well. Try to figure this out. You see the buttons, but clicking on the buttons isn't doing anything right yet. To figure out how can clicking on button 1 send 1 here, button 2 send 2 here, button 3 send 3 here. Can you do something here? Is what I'm going to leave it at. Looking at Q&A for a while. Why async commit is not a commit use effect? An asynchronous callback cannot be called directly from use effect hook. This is because the use effect hook expects its effect function to return either a cleanup that might be it. It might be because of the cleanup function. This is due to the use effect callback function asynchronous. Okay, makes sense. We haven't yet introduced the cleanup function. We probably should. But an ID someone is saying. Routing and linking someone is saying. Not really. No. Okay, don't do routing. Don't do routing. You don't have to do routing. You have to introduce a state variable here. चलो मैं इतनी hint दे देता हूँ. You have to use state here where you store what is the currently opened to do. Slide links are present in chat at the top. Let me paste them again if you want. You can convert this to this as well if you want. Slightly cleaner syntax. Yes, you can. I'm getting coarse error. You shouldn't get a coarse error unless you're sending the wrong input here. Slides URL isn't working. I think it's working. If you go here, you should see the slides. Do we have to use map? No. What if we didn't even pass an empty array? Then it just infinitely runs. You should always pass something here, otherwise you'll see this infinitely run. What is the difference between use effect and use memo? We will come to use memo soon. Sir, meetup date, tickets book करनी है. देखो, we are trying for 15th for Delhi, but again it depends on police. There are a few police things we need to figure out. What is Axios and can you explain? Oh, Axios is a library that makes it slightly easier to do fetch calls. Under the hood, if you look at its implementation, you will see they're also sending a fetch call. It's just a different syntax, a cleaner syntax of doing fetch, because you don't have to do the whole await response.data whatever.json. Slightly cleaner way to send a request. We will wrap all the buttons around our map function. Doesn't sound right. There is a lag. I think there is. I'll do a poll very soon. I've seen many use cases of Axios. Why don't we use fetch? And know they're using GraphQL. Why? I have seen many use Axios in professional code. Why don't they use fetch? It's just cleaner syntax, right? Fetch is confusing. We've all seen this many times. Done. Bhai, ho bhi gaya logon ka badhiya. I'm reading doubts from Q&A. Can we use Axios in the backend? Yes, you can. If your backend needs to send another backend request, you can. We can use stage and attach on click to the buttons. That is correct. That is exactly what is expected. And this is giving too many render errors. Let's see. Div. Yes, it will, sir. What have you done? देखो आपका code. You have written this code. On click equal to set clicker of 1. What does set clicker of 1 return? It returns undefined or something. This is where things get a little confusing. This is not the right syntax to do whatever you're doing. The right syntax is you create a function inside which you do this function call. One of the most common pitfalls in React is you call it directly like this. You should not do it. You should either define a function outside and give it the function name here, or you need to wrap your function call inside a function. Don't actually call it. That's what you're doing wrong. All right, 7:43. 2 more minutes and then I'll code. But I'm hoping a few of you have already coded this. I see one solution which looks right, and then whoever solution that is, I'm sure you're a little bored in this class. Abhi ke liye. Hopefully that changes in the next slide. Done by ID button. Show the import part of app.jsx. Show the import part of app. Oh, there you go. Chipi chipi chapa chapa. All right. On click we shall use. Okay, cool. Seems like a few people have figured it out. It's 7:44. Let me start to code it as well. This was the expected solution. Const, selected ID, set selected ID equal to use state of 1, and then I can be like button on click equal to, again look at the syntax here, on click equal to, I define a function inside which I write set selected ID of 1, and then same thing for 2, 3 and 4. I can be like, whenever the second button is clicked, I will set this ID variable to 2. Whenever the third button is clicked, I will set it to 3, so on and so forth. And then here I can be like, to do ID equal to selected ID. Originally, what will selected ID be? It will be 1. And then as I click on this button, what will selected ID become? It will become 2. So that this will become to do ID equal to 2. Then if I click on this button, what will selected ID become? It will become 3. And then what will this become? To do ID equal to 3. In fact, let me render the ID here. ID. Let me render the ID here at the top. And let's see if the code that I have written, what code have I written? Button on click equal to a function which sets this ID to 1 and 2 and 3, and the original value is 1. And rather than passing a hard coded value here, I am passing this state variable that keeps on changing based on button clicks. Do we understand the inputs a little bit? try to marinate this for like 20 seconds. Okay, what is happening here? The 3 buttons I had already written. Now I added just an on-click handler, which updates the state variable. The state variable being the value that is being passed over here. All right, 15 more seconds and then we'll start and then we'll see if this works or not. All right, let's see if this works or not. This is what my front end looks like. It says ID1 here. I see the first to do rendered. Let me click on 2. It says ID2 here, but the to do did not change. ID3, to do did not change. ID1, 2, 3. ID is changing. To do is not changing. And in fact, if you notice, no backend call is going out when I click on these. Why? Because I have rendered to do here and I am changing this ID. This use effect, what does it say? I will run the first time I am rendered. Iske baad does not matter if you keep changing the ID. I will not run this code because you told me there are no dependencies. I only need to run the first time I get rendered, which is when I refresh this page. When I refresh this page, the first time it does run. Uske baad does not matter if you change arguments to this component. This component is like, I don't care what you are sending me in. I will ignore it. I will not run this logic because you did not tell me to run this logic here. If I pass ID as a dependency here, is when it knows ki acha. Now, irrespective of if this is the first time getting rendered or the last time or the second time or the third time, if ID changes, I will re-render. If ID changes, I will re-render again. Now, if I save this and go here, click on 2, you will see new to do got fetched. Click on this, new to do got fetched. If I remove the dependency, clicking on these does change the ID. This input does change, but the to do never gets set. Why? Because this Axios call never goes out. Why? Because there is no dependency in the use effect. The use effect is like, I am not watching any variable. I don't know when to rerun. I will only run once. But if you tell it ki you need to rerun anytime ID changes, is when it will keep rerunning. Do we understand this? Is use effect clear? Can we proceed to use callback next, I think, or use memo, one of the two? Great. Beautiful. 90%, 87%. Great start. Let me pursue. Aage thoda. It's 7:48. So let's take a 7-minute break also for people who have their mess. And then we will proceed. Let's start at 7:55. And the people who are here, I'm going to open chat. If you have any questions, feel free to, but this part is basically done. Next, we'll be understanding use memo for the people who are interested, but feel free to take a 7-minute break and go to mess really quickly. Okay? Opening chat. Sorry, I had to close that quickly. Installing all these NPM packages in multiple projects, doesn't it make the app slow in prod when the project gets bigger? If yes, what are the alternatives? Yes, it does, but there is something called tree shaking, which means Axios is very big, but I am just using get, right? I'm just using get. I don't need to bring in the whole Axios library to my code base. So if I do this, then you can selectively get only the get function in here, and your final bundle will only create get, provided Axios, supports tree shaking and doesn't return you the whole library if you're just asking for get. So there are ways to optimize it. Frankly, these libraries are very small. It does not really matter. The React might be the biggest library here. Everything else is really small. Do I still need to run recoil if I know Redux toolkit well? Not really, unless you want to contribute to a project that uses recoil, which today frankly is most projects out there. Please explain use effect with set timeout. Great question. Set timeout के साथ मतलब यही होगा कि let's say I tell you कि this needs to run or this needs to change after 5 seconds. You want to give the user an artificial delay here. Then what can I do? I can put a set timeout here. कि भाई only after 5 seconds fetch the new set of to-dos. So now what will happen if the user clicks on, as you can see, after 5 seconds, the first to-do comes. Then if I click here, even though the ID changed, after 5 seconds is when you will see the next to-do. Why would you do this? Let's say you have a free tier and a premium tier, and you can be like, upgrade to premium. Otherwise you will see this slowness. So that's one reason for you to do it. Very weird use case I thought of. All right, 5 more minutes and then we'll start. Can we use set select id 2 without defining the function? Can you do this without defining this function? No. Achha, I get it. No easy way to do it. You cannot just do, you definitely cannot do this. You cannot do this. Can you do something else without defining a function called this? You can do this, which pretty much does the same thing. So an arrow function, but this is the same as defining a function only. But if you want to go as lean as possible, this is pretty lean. Create an arrow function and then say कि हाँ, after the arrow function, this is effectively the body of the arrow function that does it. Let me justify this. वैसे तो हाँ, it's already in the slides, but चलो let me do it. There you go. What is the difference between arrow functions and function declared using a function variable? There is a very subtle difference that comes into actions, like you actually see its benefit when you use this thing called bind, or if you've heard of this in JavaScript. Happy to discuss that at some point, but becomes useful only when you're worried about the binding of this variable. What this means, Harkirat, we can get to if need be. Don't need it for the longest time, but common interview question. So happy to discuss this in an offline video. Let me write that down as well. We have actually a few people asking for this. Mind. All right. Use effect async. Someone wrote an async use effect. Why not use create React app? Just preference, no real reason. Please explain the side effects in a more layman term. Side effect in a more layman term. यार pit stop से ज़्यादा layman तो क्या ही हो सकता है इसमें कि if you have a race to run, every lap can be considered as a re-render. Every lap here can be considered as this app function rendering. Rendering happens very often. Laps happen very often. But pit stops only happen from time to time. Only in like when your tire pressure changes. Only under some conditions do you actually take the pit stop. That's probably the best real world explanation I can give. All right. What are web scrapers? Basically, think of Google. How does Google work? It has scraped all the pages, which means scrapers are pages that go to a page and then look at the content from that page and then try to find the other links on that page and then go to all those pages and keep scraping the web. If you're going to call an arrow function inside an on-change, you can use. I mean, does not matter. There are certain cases in which you should use arrow functions. I will discuss them in an offline video very well. But you won't hit them for the longest time. So it does not matter which one you use. Okay, one solution, slides. All right. 2 more minutes, then we'll start. Let me fill up my water bottle here, back into. All right. 54. We will start in another minute, and we have another mildly interesting hook to understand next. Frankly, use state and use effect are the most used ones, if I'm being honest. Everything else you will see in code bases and get overwhelmed, which is why we're discussing them. I don't really use them too often, if I'm being honest, and the only thing they provide you is like some performance benefits and no real, won't really hinder your development for the longest time because, just some performance downsides you will see, which is fine. All right. Cool, hai ji. Let's kick things off with our second hook for today. We're discussing use memo next. Before we start, we need to understand what memoization is, which if you've done some data structures and algorithms, I'm assuming you know what memoization is. It is a commonly used technique in dynamic programming where you remember something. You don't recompute some data given an input. Any DP problem, if you look at that, also sort of DP with memoization is a very common theme in algorithmic solving problems. What it means is, it means remembering some output given an input and not computing it again. It's like caching. Given an input, if you have computed at an output for that input, and if then someone else again asks you an output for that same input, you're like, I have this cached value, I'm going to return this cached value to you. You don't recompute it. That's what's called memoization. But let's look at it from a more real world example. Let's say you are the driver here and you want to check how much petrol is left. When would you make that check? Would you make that check after every lap? Or would you make that after every 10 laps, let's say? Or would you make that after every 20 minutes? Would there be certain conditions under which you would look at the petrol? Because when you're driving, this is a very tedious task for you to, take your attention off the road and look at the petrol meter and then, take your attention back. So would you do this after every lap? Would you do this every other second? Or would you do it, after some time? You probably do it either after 10 laps or after 20 minutes. Under some condition, you would do this mildly expensive operation of taking your attention off the road to the petrol meter and then back onto the road, right? There are some conditions under which you are running this expensive operation. You are not running it on every render. You're not running it after every lap, right? Similarly, let's say if I ask you to create an application that does two things. Number one, it has a simple counter button that we have seen many times. And number two, it lets the user put a value in an input box, which can be 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And you need to show the sum from 1 to n. For example, if the user puts 2 here, the user should see sum is 3. If the user changes this to 5, user should see sum is whatever, 15. If user puts 100, user should answer the output here should be sum is 50-50, which is the sum from 1 to 100. There is one restriction when you're writing this code though. Everything needs to be inside app. You cannot create multiple components. You have a single component inside which you have to write all of this logic. Over to you guys. Try to write this code that supports these two things. A counter button, that is the normal counter button that we have, and another input box that does all of these things. Okay? Now, input box we haven't dealt with in a class. You might not remember the syntax. So figure it out. Spend 5 minutes and try to quickly code this yourself. I'm just going to chill and look at Q&A if there are any questions here. But yeah, you should be the one writing the code. Can you explain their code step by step? Which code? Can you please repeat the problem, please? Okay. Problem statement is create something like this that you see on the right. An input box where someone can come and put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A text that says sum is whatever is the sum from 1 to this number. And then a button clicking on which increases the value here. So if you click on it once, it becomes 1. If you click on it again, it becomes 2, so on and so forth. How can you do debouncing and throttling yourself? How need for, and then how, if there's any other good method to do it. So if you want to do debouncing, when would you want to do debouncing here? Let's say if the user clicks on the buttons very quickly, right? So in that case, as I said, you will have to figure out, useEffect has another part we haven't discussed, which is a function that it returns that does the cleanup. So you can write some debouncing logic. You basically write something like this. Ki, haan, bhai, Karo. This is a small hint if you want to look at it. Meanwhile, I'm answering Q&A questions here. I was thinking of writing it, but let me not write it. Basically, your useEffect can return a function, which is a function that should return on cleanup. And there you can cancel the timer. And then anytime the effect runs, you can create a timer. Okay, bhai, I will send this backend request after 50 milliseconds. And then, the cancel should cancel the existing request and create a new timer, so on and so forth. That's how you can implement debouncing here. Sir, 16 से एंडसम है, मीटअप थोड़ा डिले कर सकते हैं क्या? We'll see. I clicked the button, but nothing changed. For example, count was 0 for clicking after 0. React re-renders performing this action. Did any DOM manipulation happen? It did not happen. If that means your code is incorrect, Anu, and there's some bug in your code. is use reducer. Use reducer is the least used one amongst all of them. Can you explain the question again? I mean, I hope you get it now. This is what you have to build, and frankly, this is the code for it as well on the left. So, hope that's enough hint. So dependency array creates a variable that changes. Must not be necessary that this should be a state variable. Oh, so yeah, it should be a state variable. The reason I say it is, any other variable that you look at, it will change on every re-render. We will see that when we reach use callback, but usually it is state variable only. You can put another variable there that's not a state variable, but that's a very dangerous thing to do. In an example, we have passed id as a state variable. How does the component recognize that the state variable inside the component? How does the component recognize the state variable inside the component? Oh, it just knows. Itna usko pata hai. It knows that the thing that is being passed is a state variable without you having to define here. Okay, this was a state variable. React generally remembers this very well. Okay, this is a state variable. Does not matter where you pass it. It knows it's a state variable and it has been updated. All right, 1 more minute and then I'll code it. Not that I need to code it. The solution is here. I probably won't code it. I will just copy over the solution. I would urge you to also copy over the solution yourself and try to play with the application at the very least. So the dependency array basically monitors the state variables. That is correct. I have just completed use effect before this. Akash, nothing else. Do we have to memorize? You don't have to memorize at all. This is the code right here. So you can look at it. You don't have to memorize at all. What are the checkpoints in the course where you can look for work? Oh, at least another month before that happens. What is memorization? So we will get to it very soon. Memoization, not exactly memorization. Slight difference. Memoization generally is very similar to caching. What is caching? Ke bhai, if there is a function, let's say, that has to do some very expensive task. For example, think of it this way. Let's say I go to chat.openai.com. And yahan pe I search for what is your name. Now, where is this input going? It is going to a machine learning model. This is an expensive operation. Now, let's say I ask this question again. Wouldn't it be nice if this is cached somewhere, maybe in my browser only? Okay, bhai, given this input, this is the output. You can think of this as memoization. Okay. Given an input, we are not recomputing what the output is. This is, now in this case, it might actually be going to the model, but you can memorize this, right? Somewhere in the browser, you can store, okay, given the input, output was this. So you don't hit the expensive model again and again. Think of this as memoization. Okay? Given an input, you store the output somewhere so that it isn't recomputed for the same input. All right. Cool. This is the code. Let me copy it over and explain it line by line. What does the code say? Now notice this is probably the first application where we have two state variables, not one. First one is called counter. Second one is called input value. Counter only has to do with this button at the end. So if this was just the count application or button where you click it, this much code would have been good enough. Define a counter variable and a button, and when you click on the button, the value goes up. If I try to run it, you will see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The value of this counter is going up. This was the simple application we had done until now. Look at it for 10 seconds. All right. First problem. What was the second problem? This was a more complex thing I asked you to make. The second thing was, okay, there should be an input box where someone can come and put a number. When they do, in the state variable, we store the number that the user had put. I repeat, we store the number. If the user comes here and puts 5 here or 54 here, it gets stored where? This input value variable. How? Input on change equal to function set input value e.target.value. We discussed this a few classes ago. e.target.value gives you the actual value inside this input box, which let's say if I put 111 here, that is the value that you get in e.target.value. If I log it, you will see what gets logged. 44444. Whatever I'm writing here gets logged, which means I get that value in this e.target.value variable. What is e.target? We discussed a few classes ago. This is the actual reference to this DOM element, the input DOM element. If I log just e.target, you will see this input element gets logged. And then if I log the value of it, I get the actual value inside. I set that as a state variable. What do I do next? Given this input, what do I have to do? Find the sum from 1 to this number and put it here. What I do is this. I create a simple in-memory variable, call it 0, count and initialize it to 0. I iterate from 1 to input value and then do a count equal to count plus I. Run a for loop and then simply render sum from 1 to input value is count. Do we understand this code base and how it is doing the thing that we expected from the assignment? Okay, user sets the input value, we find the sum from 1 to that input value, then we store it, or sorry, render it here again. Now this is not a state variable, sorry, render it here. This is not a state variable. It does not need to be. It is a computed variable. It depends on something else. So it's fine if it's done this way. You don't have to create a third variable called count or, whatever, sum. And then, you can do it that way as well. But this is another way to do it. This is the one that we chose to write this specific problem. This is done. And it is seems to be working as expected. Sum from 1 to 1 is 1. Sum from 1 to 2 is 3. Sum from 1 to 3 is 6. Sum from 1 to 10 is 55. 100 is 50, 50. So on and so forth. Seems to be working as expected. But what is the problem in this code base? Why is this code base not optimal? Why is this code base unoptimal? What happens when I click on this button? Hakirat, when you click on this button, set counter gets called and the state variable changes and a re-render happens. What happens when the re-render happens? This logic runs again. This very expensive for loop runs again. Should it run again? Not really. Input value hasn't changed. What has changed? Counter has changed. This thing has changed. This thing has not changed. Do we need to run this expensive operation again? Can't we just remember the value from the last render rather than writing, iterating over all the for loop again? Yes, that is what use memo lets you do. The name itself has memoization. Okay, across renders, if you want to remember a value, then use memoization. Let's see how it works. Do we understand the problem with this approach? Okay, clicking on the button changes counter, does not change input value. Input value only changes when you change something here. And clicking on the button causes a re-render, which causes this for loop to run again. And this is an expensive operation that is running, even though the value is the same in the previous render and this render. Do we understand the problem statement? Problem statement में क्या नहीं समझ आया भाई? Okay, 80%. I know there are other ways to do it. I know you can have a use effect, but considering I am giving you this is the only way to solve this. What is the difference between use effect and use memo then? There's a difference. We will come to it. Don't worry. Could we? Yes. Okay. A lot of people are having this question. We could just done it with the use effect, right? Harkirat, I will do this. Const final value comma set final value equal to use state 0, and then I will create a use effect. And I will be like, anytime the input value changes, Harkirat, I will run this loop. Then I will be like set final value count, and then I will be like this. Yes, this is a decent approach, and yes, this does make sure that only when input value changes does this expensive operation run, and hence this is a good way to solve it. But what is the problem in this approach? Do I see a problem in this approach? I mean, there is one problem that I can see. You are causing an unnecessary re-render. You are causing a re-render. Firstly, input value is changing, render is happening, and then because input value has changed, final value is changing, and that is causing another re-render. That is one problem I can think of. I'm not saying this is an unoptimal solution. This is a good solution. But if you have to understand use memo, I had to find one example, right? So that is the example that I thought of. This is a good answer. We can do it like this. Why are we using it? Why do you have to introduce use memo? One reason I can give you is, okay, you are updating a state variable again here, which will cause two re-renders. So basically, if I put something here, first this thing re-renders, and then the components re-render again, and there'll probably be 1 millisecond before the final output comes here. That is the one good reason I can give you as to why this approach is slightly unoptimal. What is the other approach? Okay, we don't have a state variable. We still have the original count variable, but the only recompute count, we basically want let count, which is not a state variable, equal to somehow run all of this logic, but only run it when input value changes. We need something like use effect. Okay, bhai, there is some logic that I have written. Only run this logic when input value changes. So can I do something like this? Let count equal to use memo. The first argument is a function that needs to run only when input value changes. Very close to use effect. What we wrote a few seconds ago using use effect is very close to what this gives you as well. And what does this give you exactly? Okay, bhai, this code will only run anytime input value changes. Does not matter how many re-renders are happening. If across a re-render input value hasn't changed and counter has changed, this won't run, because this also expects a dependency array. It says anytime this dependency array changes, will this code run? Again, do you need it? Probably not. If you, as you just saw, but does it save you some extra re-render? Does it save you another state variable? Yes, it does. Rather than having a state variable, if you know, okay, count is dependent, you know, this is sort of a derivative. It depends on input value. So this is almost 100% a cleaner approach than the approach of adding a new state variable. State variables, you shouldn't define two state variables that are completely dependent on each other. If you know, okay, this variable is completely dependent on this input, there's no point of defining it as a separate variable, then adding a use effect and then updating the effect anytime the first guy changes. Just do this now. Okay, bhai, this is the logic that needs to run, that derives how count depends on input value. Again, there are too many counts here. Let me change this to, final count. There you go. So if you know this count depends on input value, why do you have to create the whole use effect? This is a slightly cleaner, saves you one state variable. Also, I can think of 1,000 reasons why this is a cleaner approach, right? What if I go with our original approach? Then you're basically creating some sort of inconsistency in your app. Here, this depends on this, but there will be times when this will be one, but this will not be the right derived value because the effect hasn't run yet. Versus here, you 100% know if input value ever changes and that re-render is happening, count will 100% first update before the render happens, which is why this is a better approach than the use effect approach. And you need use memo to avoid the extra computation. Now, if you refresh, it will still run, but this expensive operation isn't being called irrespective of if the counter is the only thing that's being updated. If this updates, then of course this is being called, and you can confirm that by putting a log here, console.log memo got called. If I put a log here, if I refresh, if I keep on clicking on counter, you will not see the log. But if I write something here, you will see the log. If I click on counter, you will not see the log. Oh wow. Application crashed. Do I have some sort of a leak set? Oh, okay, it's a big operation. Never mind. Okay, cool. Good to go. Do we understand this? How are we doing? Do we understand this logic of how use memo is slightly better than the use effect approach, even though I do understand both are equally good? But maybe this one's a little bit better. Even if it isn't, you have to understand use memo. As I said, you don't use it very often. You won't see it in, a lot of code bases. But do we understand what it does? 77% understands. That's not great. Question. Why not count use in use state? Please repeat. Okay, great question. Good question. Let's do two approaches. This is approach 1. Use memo. Approach 2. 0. Comment this out. Use effect. Input value. Do we at least understand this approach? Forget the use memo. Do we understand the use effect approach? Aren't these both the same things? No, they're not exactly the same, right? One of them is updating a state variable. Other one is computing it on the fly. There is a very big difference in this count variable that you see here and this set count variable that you see here. The count variable, I mean, it's like very hard to say, is there a difference? No, there isn't. Like they're both almost very close in terms of what finally happens. But when should you use one over the other? I have until now, till date, only used this approach, believe it or not. Rarely will I use a use memo. But is it good to know? Yes. Will some code bases be very finicky about in this case you should use memo? Yes. You will find some maintainer will be like, this in this case this is a better approach than this. And the only good reason I can give you why this is a better approach than this is that this introduces an extra state variable which will cause two renders anytime input value changes. Anytime input value changes, first input value will change, whole thing will render. Control will reach this effect. This will update count, and then another re-render will happen. So two re-renders will happen when you update input value, versus if you use this use memo approach, then anytime input value changes, count gets computed on the fly. I think now I'm 99% sure that happens. This gets computed immediately, and then the render happens, which has the consistent value of input value and count. Both of these consistently map to each other, versus in the other approach, first input value will get updated to whatever, 2, 3, 5, 7, whatever you updated it to, and then this effect will run. Your naked eye will not be able to see it, but there is a small fraction of a second where this input and this input are different. Let's actually make this a very big value. So as you can see, 9. Never mind. I was trying to show an example, but so that's the best reasoning I can give you as to why this use memo is a better approach than this. Can I use either, Harkiyat? Can I use effect? I like use effect more. Yes, you can. You don't have to use memo unless the maintainer of a project, someone is, at your head, use memo is a better way to do it. Any other questions? In short, use memo is for optimizing memoization expensive calculation, while a use effect is for handling effects. And yeah, exactly. The other reason why you should use memo is because technically this is for use memo. Use memo, this is what use memo is used for. If there is an expensive operation, or if there's a derivative operation, count depends on input value, then you want to use this and compute this on the fly, versus use effect is for life cycle events, is for something has changed, do something outside, something has changed, go and send a backend call. It is not for something has changed and then change something here in the state variable. So like philosophically, use effect is not used for it. That's the only two good reasons I can give you, but feel free to use whichever. All right. What about this approach? We will see. Let's proceed to use callback, and then happy to look at other approaches. Let me do a quick poll again, and then we will proceed to use callback. And then in the end, happy to take more questions. I think any assignment that I give you on use memo, you can actually do via use effect by, just caching it the other way, which is fine. I mean, makes sense. I don't have a good reason as to why you should use one over the other than the philosophical reason of, in this case it makes sense for you to use memo. Thankfully, the third thing we're discussing today, which is use callback, is not like that. There is a good reason why you want to use callback. There is no hack that you can do to make use effect work. All right, what was the better solution? Memoize the value across re-renders, only recalculate when the input value changes. Use effect, use callback, done. Let's understand use sorry, use effect, use memo done. Let's understand use callback. And here I don't think you can give me an alternate approach that is better. Here I'm almost 100% sure that you need use callback in the cases where you need use callback. You cannot be like, "Arey, to use effect se bhi ho jayega." You cannot do it a different way. All right. Use callback is a hook in React, a popular JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So ChatGPT gives you the whole explanation. It is used to memorize functions. I repeat, it is used to memorize functions, which can help in optimizing the performance of your application, especially in the cases which involve styled components that rely on referential equality, something new here, to the parents to prevent unnecessary re-renders. All right, something new. A few people have asked this many times. Harkirat, what happens if I define a variable here where a equal to 1? Or if I define a variable here where a equal to 1? What happens when I put this normal variable, not a state variable, normal variable as a dependency? Or what happens if I pass this normal variable to, let's say, another component, counter a equal to a? Should I ever do this, Harkirat? A normal variable I'm passing down, and when does this re-render? Does this re-change anytime a re-render happens? Does this not change? Is this a constant? Why have we never done this? Why have we never done this? Why do we always define state variables? Great question. There is a reason for it. The reason is this thing, referential equality. The reason is if you define any function or even a variable where a equal to 1, tell me this. If I define where a equal to 1 and then where b equal to 1, if I do a equal to b, will this return me true or false? So there is a hint here. It will return you true. They are equal. Are they referentially equal though? Is the reference of this a and reference of this b the same? Let me give a different example. Let's say I define function sum, which takes a, b as an input, returns a plus b. Then I define another function called sum2. Is sum equal to sum2? What would that return? Can you guess? They are exactly the same. But if I do sum equal to sum2, what does it return? It returns me false. What does that tell you? Okay, even though they are exactly the same, they are not referentially equal. Same is true for a and b that we defined. Okay, the value inside is the same. But are they present in the same value, place in memory? No. A is a different variable, b is a different variable. They point to different places in your RAM, in your memory. They are equal by value, they are not equal by reference. The question is, when does React re-render? If I define, let's remove everything from here. I define where a equal to 1. I will need one more thing. Let's keep the counter and remove everything. A simple counter app which has a button and then a demo component. You don't have to write this, which takes a as an input. Do you think demo re-renders? Okay, let's make this a use memo. Do you think demo re-renders anytime I change the counter state variable? What will happen when the counter state variable changes? State variable will change. A re-render will happen. Control will go from top to bottom again. Demo a equal to a. 1 is being passed again. Should demo re-render or not? I have added a memo here, which means this will only actually re-render if I pass something that has changed. Let's see. Save. Refresh. Click on counter. It does not re-render. A, even though I'm passing in a variable here, let me also log this a variable. And even though I am changing this state variable, the a that is being passed here is the same. It was 1 originally, it is 1 now. So demo will not re-render. They are the same, not referentially the same, but by value they are still the same. They are not same by reference because there's a new re-render that has happened. There is a new variable defined here. But if I replace this a to be a function, a random function definition, does not matter what. Oh, let's make it something like this. I made this a function and now I do demo a equal to a. Now if I refresh, do you think this will re-render anytime I click on the button? We just saw a while back when I did a equal to a, it returned true. A equal to b, it returned true. But when I did a sum1 equal to sum2, it returned false. It was not able to know that both are exactly the same things. Across re-renders, this function will get redefined. When you pass it here, React might think that this has changed. Even though, has it changed? No, it's the same function body. If I refresh, click on counter, you see re-renders are happening. That is what they mean when they say use callback. It is used to memorize functions which can help in optimizing the performance of your application, especially in cases involving child components that rely on referential equality to prevent unnecessary renders. Child component depends on referential equality. Ke bhai, function A that is being passed needs to be referentially same to the function B that was passed before, or whatever was passed before. And the thing that is being passed has been changed. Whenever it will try to do whatever, sum1 equal to sum2, it will realize something has changed. And hence, it will re-render demo. How can you prevent this re-render is what use callback lets you do. Basically very similar to use memo. Okay, whenever you are defining a function, rather than defining it like this, you define it like this. Const a equal to use callback. First argument is a function, which is your main function. And again, second argument is a dependency array. Okay, bhai, when should I recompute this function? Let's say right now we don't pass in any value. Now if I look at the final output, you will see re-renders don't happen because I wrapped this function inside a use callback. But if I don't do this, it causes unnecessary re-renders because even though the function does not really change across re-renders, it referentially changes. Now you might ask, Sarkirat, even if I define where a equal to 1 and pass it down, that also referentially changes. Yes, but ab wahan pe React does not re-render. It is smart enough to know if it is a number. I think if it is an object also it will re-render. If I define this as an object, someone, let's see, I don't know. Oh, render it. I mean, there are k. If it is an object, it will also re-render because if I define a where a equal to object, empty object, where b equal to empty object, a equal to b, it does return me false. So this is basically the kind of check that it is doing. And even though these two values are the same by value, they're not the same by reference, which is why this causes an issue. But does not happen for a number or a string, even though that's referentially dekha jaya to incorrect. Referentially they are different. If I define two strings here where a equal to 1 to 3, where b equal to 1 to 3, a equal to b does return me true, even though they're referentially different. So whatever this equal to check returns you is what React also depends on, which means if you define an object or a function, it will re-render unless you wrap it inside a use callback. Okay, chalo. Too much talk I've done. So let me now look at the chat here. Any questions? Let me look at Q&A. Do we understand? Let me do a poll first. Polls. Again, do you use this very often? No. You will see this being used very meekly in any code base. But should you define it? Yes. Oh wow. No one understands. 50-50. तो फिर इसको तो हम आराम से. Should I just repeat? Is that the thing? Or do you guys have some other questions? Opening chat. Repeat, right? I'm a little too fast. Alrighty. Great. Where let's start with the assignment and try to solve it, and then we'll understand. This was the assignment. Let me copy it over. It's present in the slides, but let me copy over the original assignment and show you what is the problem in this approach. Let's look at the code base. The code base says a simple count state variable, a simple button clicking on which the count goes up. This much code base we have discussed many times now. If I remove everything else, this code base everyone understands. If I go here, click on the button, the value of the button goes up. This is a simple code base we have written many times. Now I will introduce something extra to this code base. I will number one introduce a child component which does nothing, renders a div, and when you click on the button, it calls this onClick function that it receives as an input. You can pass functions as props, you can pass values as props, you can pass whatever you want as props. I can pass, this set count as props here. Whenever you're rendering a child component, you can pass functions in here. For example, set count is a function, I can pass it here. But what am I passing? I am passing this onClick function. This is a native function. This is not a state function. This is a simple normal function that we have seen many times. And I'm passing this to this child component. Yahan pe I am doing a button onClick equal to onClick. So whatever function came as input is what gets called when this button is clicked. If this onClick feels a little confusing, I can replace this with log something, and then I pass log something, this function, as a prop to child. And what does this child component do? I've just named it child. Can I name it something else? You can name it whatever you want. Child 2, you can name it button component, you can name it whatever you want. I pass this log something as an input. And yahan pe I define a button onClick, which this onClick gets called, which is what this. Now this might also feel confusing. Let's replace this with input function. Let's remove all extra onClicks. Do we understand this? Forget re-rendering, forget use callback. At least the code do we understand? Okay, I have defined the function. I have said button component, it has a prop, which I'm passing this function in, and then button onClick, call this specific input function, which is being passed as this log something. Do you understand this? Yes or no? इसमें क्या नहीं समझ आ रहा भाई वैसे. Okay, going to look at Q&A now. Why? Okay, what is memo? चलो इसको हटा दो. A lot of people are confused. Don't worry about memo. This is something we discussed yesterday. This memo, if you don't understand, this is something we discussed yesterday. Okay, anytime the prop does not change, this shouldn't re-render. If you don't understand it, let me remove it for now, even though this will cause issues. But chalo, let me remove it. Is it okay to explain the flow? पेस बहुत ज़्यादा लग रही है आज. ठीक है. Then this will be the last thing we discuss. So if you already understand this, we can call it here. Custom hooks and prop drilling is something I'll discuss tomorrow. Let me spend some more time here on use callback, and then we'll call it. Everything else, which frankly wasn't too much. Custom hooks and prop drilling is pretty straightforward. Custom hooks might be mildly hard. Prop drilling is pretty easy. Let me discuss these two in an offline video. Let's spend some more time on callbacks today, and then we will call it for today. So feel free to skip the class or thinking. Let me think a little bit. Feel free to skip the class if you understand everything, especially if you understand use callback. Feel free to call it here. Let me do doubts from here on. I think people are confused here as well. So let's do that. And everything else I'll cover in a slow paced, self-paced video. Custom hooks maybe also there's a lot of code writing. So might make sense for it to be an offline video. Same for prop drilling. So let's do a quick one or two polls, and then let me spend some time here re-explaining use callback. ठीक है? All right जी, poll कर लेते हैं. How was the pace? ये कर लेते हैं ऐसे. And then for the people who understand use callback, feel free to drop off. Okay, good chunk felt fast. So pause here. We will rediscuss everything specifically. So 40% felt it was fast, and so we will rediscuss everything, which means these three things. Let's start from use callback, the thing that I was teaching right now. Okay? Before that, a lot of people are asking, what is memo, Harkirat? You had written memo here. This is something we discussed yesterday. If you go to, so you'll find this in the slides yesterday. Memo lets you skip re-rendering a component when its props are unchanged. If you look at this button component function, I explained this a little bit yesterday. Okay, anytime if there is a parent component which has, let's say, a child component, if the parent re-renders, the child will 100% re-render even if the state variables that are inputs to this child haven't changed. I repeat, even if this does not accept any inputs, still if this thing re-renders, if app re-renders, then the child will also re-render unless you wrap the child inside a memo, which is what I did here. Send it to back. Unless you wrap the child. Why is this so bad? Okay. If you wrap the child inside a memo, then then the child will only re-render if the inputs to the child have changed. Let's look at that in action. There is a console.log child render here. Let me remove every extra thing here. Let's keep it very simple. I have declared a button component. I have written child render. Anytime this function re-renders, which means this function gets called again, you will see this log on the screen. Let's see what happens when I click on this button. If I click on, not this button. Oh yeah, which button? Yeah, this button. If I click on this button, you see it says child render. Even though child has no inputs, why should this render or re-render if it does not have any inputs, if there is no dynamic thing there? It is a static component, right? It does not depend on any state variable. That is just how React does it. If a parent re-renders, child will re-render. But if you wrap the child inside a memo, which means if I write code that looks like this memo comes from React, then you will notice if I now click this, child does not re-render. Child only renders once. That is what memo does. The reason I introduced this here was because we are learning about use callbacks, where we will see if we change the function here a little bit, these re-renders don't happen. But if I don't add a memo here, then the child will 100% re-render if the parent re-renders, which is why for this assignment, I wrapped this inside a memo. Do we understand memo? This is not use memo. This is just memo. Another thing we discussed yesterday. This we understand. Now, rather than this button component, I will introduce a new thing here. I am passing you not count. I am passing you something new, an input function, which is not a state variable. It is a raw function. Let's call it whatever you want to call it. I'll call it input function only, which does nothing, does a log. Now I am passing this input function, which is not a state variable, but a raw function as an input. I am getting this here, and then I'm saying, I'm not even using it for now. Chalo. I'm not even using it, just passing it, not using it. Now, this function is sort of constant, right? It isn't changing across renders. So, if the child wasn't rendering when nothing was passed, the child probably shouldn't render when I am passing this native function because it's wrapped inside a memo. Memo functions only render if the input changes. And if you look at it, the input is the same. So ideally, this shouldn't keep on re-rendering now. If I go here and click on the button, you will see it does re-render. Why? Because React is not smart enough to know okay, this is the same function as the last render. What will React do? It will do, okay, the existing function was this. Okay, the new function is this. The body is the same, but when it will do input function equal to input function 2, it will get a false. So it will be like, bhai, re-render. Input function has changed. You need to re-render. Even though across renders, the input function is the same. So to prevent this re-rendering of the child, when the input function hasn't changed, you can be like, bhai, input function is not a function. It is a variable, which is a function wrapped inside a use callback. Okay, bhai, this is now a function wrapped inside a use callback, and only if something in this dependency array changes will we consider this input function to change. Else we will be like, this input function is the same across renders, which is why Now, after adding this change, if I look at the button component, you will notice no re-renders are happening because React is now smart enough to know that acha dependency, none of the dependencies changed. Input function is the same as before. Versus if I don't add this use callback, then it does re-render the child. Let's go back to the original definition of use callback. What was it? Use callback is a hook in React, a popular JavaScript library for building user interfaces. It is used to memoize functions. That's exactly what we did, right? We memoized a function. This function we said across re-renders, we will remember its original implementation. We will not keep redefining the input function. We will define it once, remember it once, unless any dependency changes, which we have no dependency here. So basically it will remain the same as re-renders happen, which can help in optimizing the performance of your application. Has the performance of our application been optimized? Yes. This thing is not re-rendering, unfortunately. So we have optimized our front end a little bit, especially in cases involving child components that only rely on referential equality. Basically means that, especially in cases of child components that rely on the fact that, two functions that are defined separately, even if their body is the same, they're not referentially equal. Now, do we understand use callback? Oh, what was that? We do now. Great. ठीक है, फिर थोड़ा टाइम बच गया. अब तो मैं कर सकता हूँ. तो लेट मी क्विकली इंट्रोड्यूस कस्टम हुक्स. मैंने अपने हाथ क्यों खड़ा किया हुआ है? लेट मी ऑल्सो लोअर माई हैंड. तो लेट मी क्विकली इंट्रोड्यूस कस्टम हुक्स. आई विल री डिस्कस इट इन एन ऑफलाइन वीडियो, बट let me quickly do it. Like, I won't do too much of it, but then I'll just look at questions. ठीक है, great. We were able to do use effect, use callback, use memo. I will maybe spend some more time here on use memo later on as you ask questions. Custom hooks I will discuss a little bit right now, and then in an offline video, prop drilling and then introduction to the context API I will do in an offline video. Great. Let's go to custom hooks really quickly. Basically, the idea behind custom hooks is that just like you have use state and use effect, you can write your own hooks. These are just two that are available to you. There are many that are available to you. You can write your own. Only condition is it should start with the use. If you are creating a hook, it needs to be a function only, but you have to make sure it starts with the use. So basically, whenever you're defining a hook, you define it like this: function use something. Then of course inside you write some logic. We'll see what that logic is. But the goal is whenever you're writing custom hooks, your app becomes something like this. Let's look at this code base. This is the code base on the left, where if you notice the app component is slightly ugly. It has a state variable defined at the top. It has a very big use effect. Ki haan bhai, anytime something happens, do something. Of course, there shouldn't be a to-dos input here. This is a bug. It should be an empty array, and then renders it. This is very big. And then of course the to-do component. What if you could make it this clean? What if you could be like const to-dos equal to use to-dos and then simply render it? What if you could define a hook of your own which does all of this mumbo jumbo so that you don't have to do it in the main application? This is much cleaner than this, right? Especially for the person who's not doing state management or the person who's not worrying about backend calls. It would be nice if they can get a simple hook like this and then use it rather than writing all of this logic, shoving it inside here, because this gets more and more complicated if you have multiple backends to hit, multiple requests to send out. So how can you write your own hook which basically does a bunch of this logic? Let me quickly show how to do it. I will again recover it in an offline video, but let me quickly show how to do this. Let me bring this original code into my repo. There you go. Does not look like the right code here. No, let me just write it down. All right, this was the original code. It would use these to do's here somehow, basically, have a for loop here. We understand this a little bit. Okay, this is the use effect, this is the original state variable, and then you use to do's here to iterate and render something. The thing that I was saying you can do is you can define your own custom hook, call it use to do's, where all you have to do is this: take all of this logic, remove it from here, add it here, and return to do's. What will this do? It will do the exact same thing that was happening when all of this logic was here. You can either keep all of this logic here, or you can define your own hook. The property of your own hook is, if you want, you cannot define your own function, a random function, which is like sum, inside which you use state. You cannot do that. If you want to ever use a hook, the function inside which it is defined either needs to be a hook or needs to be a component. You cannot create a raw function and use a use state inside, which is why if you ever want to, remove all of this logic from here and move it to some central location, you will move it into a hook which has the same logic, returns the to-dos, and then you get them here. And everything else is the same. It'll of course initially you will get an empty array, and then whenever this request succeeds and set to-dos gets called, this will get updated, and all the re-renders happens correctly. React understands this is a state component, state variable, and then re-renders things, so on and so forth. But I will discuss this in more detail. Just wanted to give a high level overview of how you can do it. I would urge you to try this yourself if you want to. But yeah, that's a high level of it. Let's do a quick poll of how was the pace now. Do we understand at least the first 3 bits? And then also happy to do Q&A afterwards. We can do a longer Q&A today. Doubts Q&A, not when are you getting married wala Q&A. Okay, great. Perfect. Beautiful. So doubt session after this. Trying our best for 15th, which is, when is 15th? In like a week, for the Delhi meetup. May or may not happen. If it does not happen, then we will see, because I have to leave the country on 16th. So I'm trying my best here. Okay, it happens on 15th. If it does, it will happen in Tal Takuda Kalkatoda Stadium in Delhi. But we need a few permissions. So we will announce if it is happening. We have some time. It's basically next Monday. So we'll let you know. Does not happen, it will happen later on, but we are trying our best here. If you know someone in police who can help us get like some letter of something, please ping Rookie. It'll be super helpful. ठीक है जी. Opening chat now. Any questions for today's class? Questions related to the class? Any doubts that you have? All right. What if we use? Let me start from the top. ये मैं हमेशा पुट्ठा कर देता हूँ. People who have sent the message first should probably get answered first. No, never mind. It's very hard for me to find where the chat started. All right. What if we use expressions and not use callback? What if we use callback? Still, React will treat it as a variable, and then passing it should not. What if we use function expressions? What do you mean function expressions? And not use call. What do you mean function expressions? ये तो मैं term ही पहली बार सुन रहा हूँ. If you're asking, I don't know, I understand your exact question, but if you're asking this, okay, what if I pass in an anonymous function, the problem remains the same. Even if you pass to a child component a equal to function, this function will still change across re-renders. So you will still have to wrap this inside a use callback for it to work, and you can't really do it here. You'll have to do it here. Please also add notes from ML lectures. I couldn't find the notes. अरे हैं वो, I have to write the code. देखो भाई अब तो मैं आती है थोड़ी मैथ्स तो कर लो. देखो notes are there, but I have to write the logic in the website to actually download them. So if you go to whatever working with pandas, I'm sure one of these is like notes. But if you click on it, it tries to render it in a video. I think you can find it here. I think whoever has uploaded it here, they have put PDF notes correctly, so you can find it here. I think. I could be wrong, so let me quickly check. Yeah, so you can find all the notes, whatever here. Live session feels overwhelming. I'm new. Do you think it's fine for me to take offline classes? Yeah. I mean, so general learning of mine has been offline is 100 times better. I mean, I understood that after week 2 only when we did. Middlewares, like the experience people had in the offline video. There are three reasons why offline video is better. Firstly, you can pause. You cannot pause a live video. Two, there is no lag, avaz. It's high quality compared to this. And then number three is it's much more time saving. So it's generally a better approach. But again, since we've commented live, we're still doing live. But anything that feels overwhelming, I'm covering twice. So I will cover, the overwhelming bits of this week and some extra things in an offline video. Or offline is generally better for learning, is what I've learned it along. Without use memo, by clicking on a button, will it re-render every component, every child component? If you don't use memo, if you don't use memo, and if app changes, then all the things that you've rendered from here, if there are 5 children, they will all re-render, and all of their children will also re-render. Everything re-renders. That is why when we reach prop drilling next, I will explain this a little bit more, but yes, high level what you've asked is correct. If you don't use memo, a parent updates, then its child will update, and if the child has another child component, because you can have more and more children, all of them will re-render if the top level parent re-renders. That is sort of what prop drilling means. If you have a prop which goes from here to here to here to here, that's not what prop drilling means. Prop drilling means something else. But keeping that aside, if you do render this, everything will render. If you do re-render this, then everything below will re-render, unless you've put this inside a memo. Even if you put this inside a memo, this might re-render, but only if the inputs have changed. That's what this thing said right here. Memo lets you skip re-rendering when its props are unchanged. But if the props do change, if the props to this child do change, then it will re-render irrespective if it has memo. So should we always use memo whenever input value changes, and use effect whenever required to update an input value? Should we always use memo whenever input value changes, and use effect when we require updating an input value? Whenever you require updating any value asynchronously, when it depends on an effect, when it depends on a backend call, then you use effect for sure. When a variable depends on another value, for example, let's say, okay, tell me this. If I asked you, there is to dos, and then there is create an array called filtered to dos, which is all the to dos where x dot id is even. If I say give me all the to dos that are whose id is even, will you do this or will you do this? By any time to dos change, I will run all the logic and update another filter to dos state variable. Which approach would you take? Would you create a use effect and a state variable, or would you simply be like, okay, bhai, this thing seedha depends on this, why not do it in line? You would do this, but the problem here is you should put it inside a use memo, that's all. But this is better than doing this. Why? Because number one, so much code you have to write. You have to write this also, you have to write use effect also, you have to write this also. Number two, biggest problem, first to dos updates, and then after the effect runs, filter to dos update. So there is a small time in which to dos and filter to dos are not in the same state. Only after this effect runs does filter to dos gets updated, which is why you would do this right. When I ask you, okay, bhai, you get the to dos from somewhere, but only render the even to dos, you would do this. The only problem here is this gets recomputed every time, even if other state variable changes. So just put it inside a memo, use memo, and give it a dependency array. Okay, bhai, only when to dos changes should you change filter to dos, otherwise don't change it. Can't we use effect without updating state variable? You can use effect. Use effect does not need to update a state variable. You can put an alert high here. Does not have to update the state variable. Does not necessarily mean use effect only runs when you want to update a state variable. Use effect runs when you want to do an effect, a side effect. What are side effects? Set timeout, set interval, fetch. Whenever you want to do these things, you should put them inside a use effect. If we have use callback, then why should we use memo? They serve different purposes, sir. Use memo is for this thing that you saw. It's not. It's for values, and use callback is for functions. That's the biggest difference, right? If you ever do a use callback, what you get back is a function. If you ever do a use memo, what you get back is a value, number, string, whatever. That's why you would always use. They serve different purposes. Why does two successive called not render count plus 2 only adds a single one? Great question. Someone asked if I do this use effect. No. Button on click equal to set count plus 1, set count plus 1. If I do this, click me, what will happen? Will count go from 0 to 2 when I click on it, or will it go from 0 to 1? What do you think? What should ideally happen? Let's put the count here. If I click on it, should it go from 0 to 2 or 0 to 1? I've set count plus 1, set count plus 1. I've done it twice. Should go to 2. What is happening? It is going to 1. Why? You are taking the origin. Whenever you're doing set count, this isn't getting updated asynchronously. Synchronously, it is getting updated asynchronously. React state updates happen in its own time. React is like, give me what are the state updates. I might bulkify them and send them together. I will not immediately update the state. So when you do this, you're basically doing 0 plus 1 here and 0 plus 1 here. You have the original value. You are doing set count 0 plus 1, set count 0 plus 1. The count variable does not change immediately. If you log count here, it will still be 1 only. It will not be 2, which is why if you do this, it is 0 only. It is not 1. Ideally, it should be 1, right? You updated it because set count doesn't synchronously update this count variable. It happens eventually. The right way to do this, if you really want to do this, is okay. You do this. You don't pass in the value. You pass in a function. Okay, bhai. Now, if you look at it, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12. Why? I said set count. Whatever the count is at that point, increase it by 1. If this feels a little overwhelming of a syntax, you can also do this. Return C plus 1. What does this mean? कि भाई I am not giving you the value. I am telling you कि तेरी जो भी value हुई तेरे पास, whatever value you have, add a 1 to it. I am not telling you कि it is 2. I am not telling you it is 3. I am giving you a function. कि भाई whenever you are performing the state update, get the current value and add 1 to it. And then doing the same thing here. And now if you look at it, it goes up in values of 2. Does use callback hook requires the component to be wrapped inside a memo to work? No, it does not require the child component to be wrapped inside the memo. It is just because I wanted to show you. So, good question. Why did I wrap the child inside a memo? Does use callback always need the child to be inside a memo? No, I will tell you why I put it inside a memo. If it happens quickly, it's taking a long time. Okay, almost there. There we go. So why did I wrap this inside a memo? Whenever you're using use callback, do you have to put this inside a memo? No. The reason I put it was, how will I show you, rendering is happening or not if I don't put this inside a memo? I wanted to show you, clicking on it isn't rendering the child. But if I remove the memo, irrespective of whether or not this is cached or whether or not this has changed, the child will re-render because parent has re-rendered. So there won't be any way for me to show you, this wouldn't have re-rendered. You have done an optimization. If I don't wrap this inside a memo, only because I've wrapped this inside a memo, is when I can tell you, haan bhai dekh, it is not re-rendering because the input arguments aren't changing. But even if the input arguments don't change, you can still, have the child re-render because the parent is re-rendering. That is why I put a use callback here. You don't have to. Does it has a prefix to use with keywords for custom hooks? Does it have a prefix to use? Does it have, you have to have a prefix use for a custom hook? That is correct. Whenever you're writing something, you have to prefix it with use if you're creating your own hook. Create video on oops. JavaScript to bhai दूर दूर तक रिश्ता नहीं है oops का. Why exactly? What if we use function expressions and not use callback? Still treat it as a variable, then pass it. I think I answered that right. फंक्शन एक्सप्रेशन वाला, हाँ चंडीगढ़ मीटअप भी होगा, कब होगा देखना पड़ेगा. चंडीगढ़ ओनली द गुड थिंग अबाउट चंडीगढ़ मीटअप इज इट विल बी वेरी पीसफुल, नॉट लॉट ऑफ पीपल. दिल्ली एंड बैंगलोर गोइंग टू बी a lot of people, but we'll see. Please explain use memo. Use memo, हाँ use memo पे थोड़ा time spend करते हैं. That is something I haven't spent too much time on. Let's see कहाँ गया use memo. This was the code. Let's again get the code locally. This is some code on your screen. What is happening? An expensive operation is happening on every render. Anytime either counter changes or input value changes, this for loop is running. What is the final application that we have? This thing right here. I can put a number here and it tells me the sum from 1 to that number. I can increase a counter. Anytime I am increasing a counter, this state variable changes. This one does not. Why are we recomputing input value when counter is changing? We should not, right? We should only recompute this when input value changes. Whenever I put something new here, this expensive for loop should only run when this changes. How can you implement that in code? For that, you can be like const count equal to use memo function, which actually does the expensive computation. And when this function should recompute, when input value changes. Only if input value changes should this recomputation happen, else this should not run. And now if I, doesn't matter how many times if I click counter, this for loop will not run. This for loop will only run if I put 5 here. Then this will run and update the value. So that's why you need use memo. You put your expensive logic inside a use memo and tell okay, bhai, only when this thing changes should you rerun. What if I don't put input value here, Harkirat? What will then happen? Then it will stop computing your sum. Sum from 1 to 22 is 1. It is not recomputing this at all because you did not give it the dependency. Okay, bhai, if input value changes, please rerun. So it's not rerunning only. So you have to give the right set of dependencies. But given the right set of dependencies, now this expensive operation won't run if I change the counter. And that is exactly what we want. We don't want the expensive operation to run anytime counter is changing. What if we do want that, Harkirat? Then you can put counter as a dependency here. If you do want this to happen, whenever counter changes, put counter as a dependency. So that's what use memo does. If we have use callback, then why should we use memo? Bata diya completely different things. Answer that. Every person asks the same question thrice. I feel like 100 questions have been asked, but actually 33 have been asked. Does use callback hook requires, okay, ye bhi ho gaya tha. Does it have, okay, bhai, same question. Am I at the bottom again? Okay. Someone posted a very big code. What about this approach? Let's see. Someone has posted an approach. Copy, paste. हाँ, ये क्या है भाई? हाँ, okay. Okay, what is the thing? I think the problem remains the same, right? Oh, no, it does not. This also works. This also works. Yeah, this also works. Now also you're doing the expensive computation, and you also have gotten rid of the expensive computation. But yeah, sure, this works. I mean, yeah, pretty optimal. Please also, okay, answered that. Shadi. What if we use, okay, answer that. Can we use multiple use effects? Multiple use of a single component. Can you show a small example of that? Sure. So let's say you have 2 backends. Let's say I ask you, render all the to-dos and to-do with ID 1. How would you do it? You would be like, acha, theek hai. All to-dos, set all to-dos equal to use state empty array. And then const current to-do, set current to-do equal to an empty object. And now you can be like, anytime the thing renders, send a fetch call to get all the to-dos. And then, do whatever you want here, set the all to-dos variable here when the fetch finally succeeds. And then another one to get the to-do with a specific ID, ID equal to 1, let's say. So this is how you can have multiple use effects. You can have multiple use memos, have first variable that is a use memo, and then another variable that is a use memo. Yeah, there's no restriction of how many of these you can put. So use memos for memoizing value, use callbacks for memoizing functions. Yes, that's perfectly said. Use memo is for memoizing value, use callback is for memoizing functions. Off topic, answer it when you want to. What is the end-to-end encrypted WhatsApp feature implemented? And WhatsApp says they even don't know what the messages are sent between two parties. Doesn't mean that they have to store messages in a database. They do have to store messages in a database. High level info ये है कि when you have end-to-end encryption in a messaging app like WhatsApp, you and I share a key, and then I lock my thing with my key and your key and send it to you. So only you can decrypt it because you have your key and my key. WhatsApp does not have either of our keys. That's how general two-way end-to-end encryption works. Okay, even if there is a person in the middle who's able to get your data, they're not able to read it. Very famous example of this is let's say I have a tijori. If I have something secret to give you, how will I send it to you? I will first lock it and give it to you. Then you can lock it and give it to me back. Then I will unlock it and give it to you back. And then you can unlock it because you have your locker key. I have my locker key. I lock it, give it to you. You lock it using your lock. So you put another lock on it. Return it back to me. I remove my lock. Then I return it back to you. And then you can remove your lock as well. That is another way to do end-to-end encryption. There are ways to encrypt data in such a way that a central server, even though it's storing your data, cannot understand it. If I'm sending you some tijori, I'm sending it to you via someone, right? Like via Kabutar or via Aladdin or someone. That person, I've put a lock on it, so they cannot read it. Even if they're storing it, they cannot read it. That's the high level. I think use effect will recalculate sum if the input value goes from 1 to 2 to 1. But use memo will memoize. Oh, that might be a beautiful. Actually, I don't know if that happens. We'll see. I don't think that happens, I say. I don't think memoization, actually stores it somewhere unless I'm wrong here, but let's see. Okay, there you go. Use memo, and let's see. No, that would be nice though. If that's the case, then that's a beautiful reason for us to use memo over use effect. Memoized. Refresh. Even though I get that's the official definition of memoization, I don't think that actually happens. See, it reruns. If I run it for 1, it runs. If I run it for 1 again, it runs again. Without use memo, by clicking on the button, it will re-render every time the component. Can't we use effect? I think I answered this, right? So should we always use? Okay, answered that. What is the difference between memo and use memo? Memo is something we discussed yesterday. Use memo is something we discussed today. Very different, significantly different. Kalvari class, go to yesterday's class, go to today's class. Very big difference as to what they are. It's like asking the difference between Java and JavaScript. Just because the names are the same doesn't mean they're the same thing. They're like significantly different. One is a hook, one is not a hook. One is used to wrap a component, one is used to memoize data. So they're pretty significantly different things. What if we use? Okay, answered that. Please also add answered that. Explain use memo. I did explain that. What if? यार एक ही बार भेजा फिर सवाल मैं पढ़ लेता हूँ सारे. Okay, opening it again. Only ask a question once. I promise I will answer it. Don't ask it twice. All right, let's go from the bottom. What's in next class? Oh, I think a lot of things in offline videos. And then we'll see. Hoga React. It will be state management if we are able to cover a lot in offline videos. Else it will be, a bunch of things that were supposed to be covered this week. Can we use what to use for fetch, use memo, or use callback? What to use for fetch, use memo, use callback? For fetch, you want to use memo in case you feel like fetching it, like fetching some data. There are cases in which you use callback for a fetch function as well. If you want to memorize the function, you use fetch. If you can't use fetch for a use memo. Okay, that's probably another reason why you cannot use memo. Like when you need use callback versus use memo, I don't think you can do. Pretty sure you cannot do asynchronous function here. Like a use memo cannot take an async function as an input, and so you cannot do a fetch call here. So yeah, that's probably another reason when you want to do an asynchronous call, you have to use a use effect. When you don't want to use an asynchronous call, when something depends on something else synchronously, is when you use memo. Can't you bind use effect in a variable like use memo? No, you cannot bind use effect in a variable. It's not returning anything, right? It's supposed to call something else, not supposed to return anything. This use callback solves re-rendering problem with the type function, but what about objects? The child component will re-render if the prop types is an object and it changes. Re-render, right? Yes, you probably want to use. So that's the thing, right? Anything other than functions, you can memoize via use memo, which includes objects. Unless, you can use memo for memoizing objects is the best explanation I can give you. Generally, you never define variables in here. You most of the times are either defining state variables or some dependency from this thing to a state variable. You're not, and when you're defining a dependency, most probably it won't be an object. But okay, if it is an object, how can you memoize it, Harkirat? You can memoize it via use memo. So won't the dependency change when the React re-renders value is the same as previous? If yes, then use callback also fires again. So won't the dependency change when React re-renders even if the value is the same as previous? If yes, then use callback also fires again. Also, we need a video on VS Code speed typing shortcuts. How do you moving too fast? I'm not using any shortcuts. I'm literally not using any shortcuts in my VS Code. So like, I don't think if I can do much there. So won't dependency changed when React renders even if the value is the same as previous? I don't understand this question. Won't dependency changed when re-renders even? Okay, I guess your question is, if I understand this correctly, I probably don't. Is if you have a use callback, if a re-render happens, won't this dependency change because everything gets called from top to bottom again? Won't this get called again? The answer is no. This does not get called across re-renders, even though this function does run again. It understands that the dependency hasn't changed, so it will not run this, and this input function won't change across re-renders if the dependency here hasn't changed, if that was your question. So basically memo is for data and use callback. So memo is for data, not really. Memo is put on like components, and use callback is for function when it input is changed, and use callback is for function when its input changes. Use callback is for function when its input changes, that is correct. Memo is for something else only. Use memo is for data. Why are you returning count in use memo? Oh, well, use memo, the way it runs is, okay, you memoize a function, and whatever value this returns is what gets stored here. This count variable is different from this count variable. This says whatever this function returns is what I will cache. So, this returns a value that gets stored here. Why can't you use hooks and normal function? You just cannot. Just a restriction on hooks have to do a bunch of things, right? They are very closely related to the state. Anything that you see that's created by a state or any hook that you see, so even this is a hook, right? Use state, use effect, are sort of part of something React is constantly looking at. If you define a native function or sum or x, that's something that React isn't really looking at. So when you create a hook is when React understands, these are things I need to monitor. And for that separation of concern, I'm assuming, you cannot define or use a hook inside a normal function. It needs to be a hook or a component. Is React checking function calls by reference and not by value? Is that right? Yes, it is checking if two functions are equal by reference, which is never the case, which is why it's re-rendering. How do you highlight the element in the browser? How do you highlight the element in the browser? What do you mean? Like this, like I hover over it and it highlights? Is that your question? Where button component declared, cannot understand the syntax. Where is the button component declared? But wherever it was declared, it was just a dummy component. Whenever I declared a button component, it was a dummy component. Can you paste the gist to the code, Sohib, anytime, the next time I open chat? Someone wrote some code. The example, why is it not infinitely rendering as in dependency count? So there should be a use callback. Okay, let's see. The question is, why is this not infinitely re-rendering? Count, set count user, handle fix, set count, count plus 1, use callback, count. Okay, so this is not infinitely rendering. To answer that question is, okay, anytime count changes, handle click ka signature changes. This doesn't get called. anytime count changes, the signature of handle click changes. Handle click now becomes whatever, set count 3, 4, 5. This doesn't actually get called. It only gets called when you click on this button, which is why it does not infinitely re-render, because use callback doesn't mean anytime count has changed, it is going to call this. It is going to change the signature of this, going to change what this function looks like and referentially be a different function. It will not actually call the function. How to start reading open source code bases, how to start, which one can I start reading? So there are 3 videos that have been posted. I think they're pretty good. For processing is the simplest one. It's a very old code base, which is why it does not follow a lot of practices. So if there is one you should look at right now, if I have one I would look at right now, if I'm a complete-ish beginner, these are the best ones. Iske baad whatever is coming is going to be much harder. This one is a simple project. If you don't want to worry about React, also only want to worry about JavaScript, then this one and this one are good videos to look at. What if we have the call 3 API in components? What will be the best in this? One API inside use effect? Yeah. You can have a single API. You can have 3 different use effects. You can have a single use effect with 3 APIs. Either is fine. I mean, what is the cleaner approach? I think I would have 3 different use effects. Could totally be wrong. This is just a personal preference. Not sure if this is the ideal interview answer here. What do you use for fetch? What to use for fetch? Use memo or use callback? Okay, answered that. It's going to be neither. For fetch, you use effect. Does use effect run inside the code first time also? Apart from the state, yes, it runs the first time also, and then anytime the state variable changes, it does run again. Can use effect take functions as well as a dependency array? Like when we are going to function, like when the function runs, use effect also gets called. It cannot take it that way. It cannot be like when this function runs, you run whatever is being called. If you want to do that, you do something like this. You create a use effect which has whatever set of dependencies, which is not that function. Then this calls some function. And then wherever you wanted, one function runs, this logic runs again. Over there, you call main. You cannot be like, watch on another function being called. You cannot do that. So if you want to do that, define a separate function, call it there. What to use for fetch, use memo or use callback? Answered that. Since each component is direct, indirect child of app component, that is correct. Is it a good idea to wrap all inside a memo? It should also save a lot of re-entering across the project. That is a good question someone asked in the last call as well. My only concern with this is, if that is the case, why isn't this the norm? Okay, child does not render unless the prop has changed. Why did React in the first place have this sort of an architecture? Okay, you have to explicitly tell a child, is memoized or uses this is wrapped inside a memo. So I don't know. Probably yes. Theoretically sounds great. You wrap every component other than app inside a memo so that only if the prop changes it re-renders. But is there a good reason for them to not do this by default, React people? Probably yes. So figure out what that reason is. I don't know. Yeah, theoretically sounds great, but most code bases I haven't seen this happen. What to use for fetch? Use memo. Okay, answered that. Use effect. Backend roadmap. Backend पे आते हैं भाई अभी front end एक बार. Let's finish front end completely and then go to backend. अभी तो there is a lot to do. आज फिर solution समझ ही आया, problem statement समझ नहीं आया. Okay, keep that in mind. Next class will be next weekend, but there will be a bunch of offline videos this week. How does React understand which function is a component and which is just a function? That is a good question. I mean, there are a few basic things here. Every component starts with a capital A, returns some JSX or React.create elements, and every hook starts with a use. If I had to guess, I would think that is the reason. That is how it knows what is a hook, what is a component, and what is a normal function. Normal function starts with a small letter. Use memo and pure function is the same concept. That might be the case. Pure function यही होता है क्या? Pure function in React. Based on the concept of purity, what is a pure component in React? Based on the concept of purity in functional programming, a function is said to be pure if it means the following. It returns a value that is only determined based on inputs. It returns the value always the same for given inputs. A React component is pure if it renders the same output given for this type of class component. Class component can extend, but have some performance improvements like render optimization because that shallow comparison. वैसे तो this is a pre-React. This seems like a not a functional component thing. This seems like a class-based component thing. And yes, here it seems like a pure component. When it checks whether or not it should update, whether or not it should re-render, it does a shallow comparison between props and state. Props basically mean what is being come. State probably means what was present already. So it does. If I had to guess, I think if I use something like this, you can also try this. I think you can just use class components in your, this thing. Let's try it out. Let's see if this gives the same result as memo. It might not. I'm unsure if I'm being honest. Console.log re-render. Oh, you cannot do this, can you? Let's do this and let's see child, and then let's put a button on click equal to all right, let's see. Oh, okay, let's see. Let's see if a re-render happens when we click on this. Yes, that's exactly what a pure function is. And now let me remove pure function from here. Refresh. And now, yeah, there you go. That is exactly what a pure function is, sir. Or a pure component in class-based, whatever this is. Yeah. What is FP? Floor price. Hota hai FP to. Please make offline video for arrow function, use memo and callback. Let me write this down. Arrow function ka to pata nahi, but use memo and use callback. I'm happy to. Is React checking the function call reference and not by value? Is that right? Yes. I mean, not exactly right. देखो मतलब तुम ये चीज़ कहोगे तो फिर देखो let a equal to 1 है, let b equal to 2 है. Are these equal by value? Yes. Are these equal by reference? No, they're not. But oh sorry, b equal to 2 करें, b equal to 1 करना था. Now these are not equal by reference. These are equal by value. And whatever is this equal to check, whatever, which basically means for numbers, integers, it is equality by value. But for functions and objects and arrays, it is equality by reference. That is the same thing React does to check if there's a diff. Please upload ML. बस भाई लगे हुए, ये दूसरा लैपटॉप इसी लगा रखा है. As time comes, I do it. But there's not too many weeks left now. I think 6-7 weeks more I need to, but just have to sit one day and do it. All right. Can you bind use effect in a variable like memo? Can you bind use effect in a variable like memo? Can you bind use effect in a variable? Oh, you cannot. आज सिर्फ solution ही समझ आ रहा है. Okay. Use memo. The other solution to separating components or having separate components for counter button. If you define function const var equal to function and then reference will be the same, right? And can we use the state of custom hook outside the function? So पहली बात तो you brain is not working to comprehend a question this long, if I'm being honest. So post that, either just tag me, I'll look at it later. So and put some more, code snippets there about what you're asking. It's a long question. If we use memo, what if memory leaks? And then what if happens to and what will happen to memoized? What do you mean memory leaks? What will happen to memoized? So actually, this memoization is not the same as DSA memoization. As we saw, just because it's memoized does not mean it remembers, 1 kilo value was this, 2 kilo value was this, 3 kilo value was this. It will recompute it if you change the value. Memoization only means that across renders it won't change if the value is changed. So there is no real concept of a memory leak affecting this specific, value. When you use DSA हो सकता है, there's a memory leak, then you are not able to find an existing value. Where to use, this is very, very DSA. I know you know DSA and not React when you ask that question. When you use user state 0, use state 0 and use state 1, I'm confused. You mean use state and not user state, right? If you don't understand this, you haven't yet understood state at all. So you should probably go back to the React original classes. Where is button component declared? I cannot understand the syntax. If there was ever a button component that I wrote, then it was a dummy component, so don't worry about it. If you know, it probably just returned some dummy simple button, something like that. So even if you don't see it, it's fine. All right. Hooked into React hoods, cohort, React mastery. Akira's expert navigation while community. All right, great, perfect. That's great. Twitter पे दिखाओ मुझे ये चीज़. Please make simple. I think you're making it complex. Yeah. I have tried to break it down to as simple as possible. The good thing I can tell you is that a lot of these things you don't need. You only need use state and use effect. If you understand use state and use effect, you're off to the races. So I have the obligation to complete everything. Does not mean everything is really needed in the real world, or generally you don't need a lot of these things for the longest time. But this is as simple as it can get, I feel. Now I'm a bad teacher, probably. Maybe there's an easier way to do it. This is the as dumbed down as I can dumb it down, right? In the next in the input box example, can we get data from input box? Should it be text? Are we computing value on text value? Where are we converting it text to int? Yes, you do get text, but what were we doing? If we were doing a for loop, so it does not matter if you do a for let I equal to 0, I less than 5, I plus plus, or if you do for I equal to 0, I less than 5, I plus plus. Both will sort of work, which is why for us in our case it did not matter, and the for loop just worked. Even if you pass a string here, it's fine. If you want to pass it, you can pass it to an int here like this, but you don't have to. Where's the chat? Zoom. Can't you memorize functions using use memo? Probably it will be mildly ugly syntax, but sure, I think you can. Yeah, you can probably memorize the function using use memo, but again, it will be like a function inside a function, which sounds a little weird, but sure. I mean, yeah, you have found a hack, sir. Yeah, yes, you don't need use callback. You can just memorize a function using use memo. Personally, I don't like parallel coding. Is wasting some time. Instead, give us assignment heavy practice. Okay, I'll do a poll on this. Let me write this down as well. Parallel coding versus later coding. Parallel coding versus later coding. Whatever the poll decides, we can follow. All right. In this example is okay. I answered that, right? It's not infinitely entering. What to use for okay, answered that. Please teach us cleanup. Yeah, we should probably, let me write that down as well. Cleanup in use effects. We'll cover in an offline video. Why is it going up by 2? Shouldn't the app render once set count gets called? Yes, but it happens so quickly. Okay, you don't see 1 and then 2. You immediately see 2, which is why you don't see 1 there for like a flash. You probably see it for a flash of a second, but like it happens very quickly. Or React might do some optimization. React might do some optimization and push both the changes together as well, like flash them together for just optimizing the code. This use callback solves re-rendering problem with type functions. What about objects? So here object, when I said you can use memo rather than using use callback. Why was use callback even introduced if use memo does everything? Let's see. I'm sure ChatGPT has an answer, and most probably the answer is going to be it's a cleaner syntax. Why even use callback when use memo can memorize a function? Can't it? Can't you bind use effect in a variable? You cannot. Real life use case of use callback. Another example. Use callback. No use case. मतलब देखिए literally बता रहा हूँ कि barely have I seen anyone use it. You can always just define naked functions here and pass them to a child. Should you wrap it inside a callback? Probably. So basically think of it this. If you were writing a good application, a solid application, any naked function that you're defining, right, which is not a set count or a set, a hook, something that a hook returns, you should wrap it inside a use callback. Yeah. Or if you're writing moving fast, you don't care, you shouldn't. That's just choose either one of these and just do it across your code base. If you are using use callback, you have to be very careful of the dependencies. If you add all the dependencies here, count and set count and then whatever dependencies this has, then it makes no sense to wrap it inside a use callback, because anytime this thing renders, this also will rerun. So just make sure you're picking your dependencies correctly whenever you're defining a use callback. But do you have to? Not for the longest time. You don't need it really. Does it optimize your code? Yes. But is it noticeable? No. Use callback. In summary, when you use memo function, it is intended purpose. Use callback is appropriate hook for memoizing function instances. But when you need I get it. But a use memo can simply do the same thing, return a function, right? Okay. If a primitive variable can also be passed as a prop, then does React.memo trigger re-render for a non-state variable? Are the non-state variables also monitored by React? So exactly what I said a while back, right? Function, ye jo function kya, what is this? This is a non-state variable. If you do pass it down as a prop, the child does re-render unless you wrap it inside a callback. And same for, not the same for strings. If there is a number here or a string here, and if you pass that down, then it won't re-render across renders of this parent. But if it is an object or an array or a function, then the child will re-render for a primitive, but not for a string or for a number. All right. Yes, you are correct. The use memo can return a memoize function, effectively doing the same thing as use callback under certain scenarios. In practice, you can use memo to memoize a function, and it will work similarly to this. Here's a comparison. In the second example, however, it is important to know that use memo to memoize function is not its primary intended use case. तो हाँ वही यार कि उसका use case नहीं है वो. You can use it for it, but also like if you look at it, this is slightly weird syntax, right? If you're using use memo, a function which returns a function versus here it's a simple function. That's the best explanation. Okay, answer that. What if we have to call a okay, answer that is primitive variable. Okay, answer that. Off topic, but I want to know what this thing is using WebSocket just after opening the website. I don't think they're using WebSockets. They don't need to. This is simple. Page has no real-time capability, so probably not WebSockets. Simple HTTP calls. When does use callback actually memoize a call? When does use actually memoize a callback? It stores this function signature whenever you're writing use callback. It stores this function signature somewhere, and doesn't matter how many re-renders happen, unless the dependency has changed, this thing remains stored there. So this function signature is what it memoizes. All right. Seems like I've covered all the questions here. Chalo ji, 9:30. Let's call it. I will see you guys in a few offline videos. Very offline heavy video week I feel this is going to be, if we want to get back up to pace, but will be simple, slow, self-paced, aram se, hai na? So chalo, let's call it. Thank you all for joining, and I will see you guys in the next one, basically next week. Yeah. All right. Bye bye.